Hi and welcome back. I promised to do a video about the model background that I did on this bird here that I showed in my watercolor paper info video. Normally it is something people don't want, but you can also use it as a feature. So this video will be about how to either avoid it or get it depending on how you want it. So, and it is best on paper that doesn't absorb water all that much. So I have here my block of, or actually it's a pad because it's only one side glued, of Canson Montval paper. It is a fine grain cold pressed paper and it's only a 200 GSM. I use this for kind of sketches and swatches and stuff, and it's a 100 sheet pack, so it was a bargain, and I used about half of it by now actually. This is what I use it when I demonstrate watercolor stuff. What it is a cellulose paper, and it's quite a lot of sizing on it, so it doesn't absorb very well. Let's see here. Cold pressed, easy to correct, 100% cellulose. It's also suitable for acrylic gouache and calligraphy. So, and I've drawn out a square here. I actually had a ruler out because I want to, maybe if it turns out okay, I might use it as a banner on my YouTube channel. It hasn't had a banner and the channel is nearly a year old, so that's lazy. So for this I'm gonna use some watercolor markers, and I'll grab some here. I think I'll use some fall type colors. Deep orange, burnt sienna, deep yellow. The saffron orange is gorgeous. We need some reddish browns as well. What have we got here? We got a mahogany and a reddish brown. That'll be okay. I think that will be. And I'll use a water brush. I might have to pause the camera at some point and go and get some clean water. The water I got at the moment is murky. I used it for gouache and I haven't changed it, so. And I'm just gonna do this kind of an abstract kind of way, where I want the yellow kind of here in the middle. Add some water to wash it out. And if you want those drying lines to show up, you need to use a lot of water and leave a pool of water on the paper. And what happens, especially because the water doesn't sink into the paper, the paper will boggle a little bit, and some of the paint the color will seep out to the edges of wherever your pool of water is. It's a little unpredictable where these things show up. You just kind of have to see what happens. It follows its own pattern on the wet paper. I haven't figured out how to totally control and predict where it goes. Saffron yellow. This is one of the new colors from Ecoline that came out a few months ago. I haven't really used it all that much. Try and blend it together. The paper pills a little bit, so try to pick that up. Now I put a drop of water deliberately on there. You can see it's already starting to form a pattern of its own. Some call it cauliflowering. It's a baby with a lot of names. I think it's called something different depending on where in the world you're from. Just be really generous with the water. If you're not using it as a feature, this is actually a sign of poor water control. You have used too much of it. So if you get this when you don't want it, you have left the paper too wet, and you need to use a little less water next time. And water control is kind of a practice thing. You have to know your brushes and your paper and your colors and stuff. It's not something I can teach a course in. I can tell you how to tell when you have a water control issue, but I can't really give you that finger feel you need to develop to figure out when it's just enough and when it's too much. That's part of the learning process. It's like anything else physical. You can only tell people so much how to do it. The rest is up to practice. Oh, it's too purple. I don't want that as the last color out against the yellow. That one too. This one will do. So yeah, I just let them kind of flow where they want to go. You can see here the reflection, how wet it is. And yeah, I can kind of put it down someplace, but I can't really control how far it runs and what shape it will get. It depends on how the paper buggles and things like that. So if you're a control freak, this is not a method I would recommend, because it'll probably drive you insane. Now if there's some edges you don't like, you can go in and re-wet them and just kind of soften them up and move them. Like here, there's a zoom in. See that edge there, I don't really like too much. So I just go in and I scrub at it a little bit with my brush. Just gently, just adding some water and move it around as it wets. This is maybe also a little too harsh. You couldn't see that because zoomed in. So yeah, so it's fairly simple. It's easier to do with something that is dye based than pigment based. As long as that is drying, I could actually grab a watercolor, a pigment watercolor, and show you how pigments act on the same paper. We can just play around a little bit over here. See, that stays better where I put it down. The watercolor is not moving as much as the dye does. But I left a drop there so we could see how that acts. With pigments you can also better control the wetness of your paint, how wet it is. It's harder with the dye. You can have, with pigment, you can have a paint that is a little thick actually, but not so with the dye based stuff. So if you're practicing your watercoloring skills with any kind of watercolor marker, what you learn does not directly translate into pigment watercolors. So you will probably find that you got a little bit of a transition thing if you move between one and the other, and if you're not used to, if you practiced only one of them. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's not like a huge thing. It's not like, oh, you should just stick with one. Just don't be surprised if you move from one to another and you find out that there's things that just doesn't quite act the same. Let's make a pool over there and see what that does. Add a lot of water to this. Let's see what we get. So while I was doing that, this part dried some. It's at least enough that you can start to get an idea about how it dries up. There's still a kind of some edges there I don't really like, but yeah, you get some patterns here. You get some of the same over here, but not in it looks different. This was a lot of water, and the paper buggles like this, and it has a hill. It is the top is here and this is at the bottom, so all the water and the pigment ran down here, but it left a little bit of a rim around that wet edge. So you can play around with it, you can try and move it and mix things. If you don't like it, you can try and move the pigments back where you want them. So, or you can try and use a little bit of paper and soak something up. See, because this is there's so much sizing on this paper, the pigment pretty much lifts right off the paper here and leave it white. So we can lift here. But the dye you can't lift quite as well because that sinks into the paper some more, even with a good deal of sizing. So and that the difference between how well it lifts has to do with the size difference. Dyes are molecules, so they're tiny, and they kind of work their way in to the paper fibers and around them, so they are difficult to lift. Whereas the pigment it's like a fine flour. It is little tiny grains, and they sit on top of the paper. And if there's that the sizing lies like a thin layer on top of the paper, and down here is the paper fibers. And then we have the sizing, and then the pigments just lie on top of the sizing. And because it's gelatin, it might dissolve a little bit, so it might be caught a little bit in the sizing, but pretty much they lie on top like that. If there was no sizing, we just have plain paper again with the fibers in here, and they will stick out of the surface a little bit. Then the pigments get caught up in between the fibers and sticks to the paper a little better. So paper without sizing, you will get that the pigments stick to the paper a little better. And without sizing, it's actually difficult to use the dye-based because they just kind of go through the surface and get all the way down into the paper fibers and the pulp of the paper really quickly. They just soak in. So that's why sometimes if you use a paper with no surface treatment and you use these dye-based markers, even though they say watercolor on them, you'll see it just sinks into the paper and stays there, and no matter how much water you put on it, you can't really move it. So yeah, and things are slowly drying up here. That looks more attractive than the watercolor version of it. So yeah, so if you get ridges between color transitions or parts that you have been painting, then you have likely either used too much water or not enough. If you get dry edges, and that you can get if you want to make something the same color all over, and you have to go and pick up some more color and you paint on. If there's an edge like this here, that is because the paper got too dry while you were getting the next load of paint, and that is then you either didn't wet the paper enough, or you waited for too long, or the paper just simply absorbed the water too quickly for you. If you have problems with that, I can recommend, and you want like a smooth transition or a smooth wash, I can recommend that what you do is you wet the paper first with pure water, and then you go and you pick up your color on your palette and then add it, because then you will get a smooth area. And even if you didn't get enough pigment off your palette at the first place and you have to go back and pick up more, you can still, it's still wet enough, long enough for you to be able to spread it out and even it out so you get a smooth area, and you can move it around until you are happy with how it looks. So yeah, and these here, if you get something that dries up like that, you simply just left much too much water on the paper. So that's part of the water control issues. And if you have some semi-dry paper and you paint up, I don't know if this can do it. No, yeah, the sizing works too well here. On other types of paper, if you take something that is kind of dry, you can't see the water on the paper anymore, but if you touch it you can feel it's cold. So it's semi-dry. If you put another wet color up to it, sometimes you can get that it starts to feather in along the fibers of the paper. But again, this is sized paper, so we got that gelatin coating that protects it from doing that. So if you want to have colors touch up and have a well-defined line between colors, let the first layer dry completely before you go over with the next glazing. So this is nearly dry. There's buggles like crazy. But yeah, that's really all there is to doing that kind of effect. If you want a little deeper yellow. I don't think that I will use that for anything. I'll just use it for this. And that over there is just one hot, spotty, runny mess. That is good for nothing. So, yeah. I think that was all I can do for now about this. And so I showed you some of the properties of paper with a lot of sizing and how to either use or not use wet pools of paint. And you can also not tell in advance if it was going to be like a hard line like this or it's going to be a softer line like this. It kind of depends on how wet the paper was and the color and stuff, so it's a little unpredictable. If you don't like it, you can try and fix it. I emptied that brush. There's no more water in it, but we got more. I filled up all my brushes the other day. Can't remove it entirely, but now I soften it up a bit. So yeah, mottled backgrounds if you like them, and yeah, use something dye based instead of something pigment based, at least if the paper is this heavily sized, because this is not attractive at all. So thank you all for watching, and please like and subscribe and keep coming back. Take care. Bye bye.